Music. The doorbell rang 3 times, quick and insistent, like someone who couldn't wait. Henry, the millionaire from the most expensive street in the neighborhood, found it strange. No one he knew rang like that. When he opened the door, time seemed to stop. 2 identical boys, around 6 years old, were on the immaculate carpet of the mansion. One held a crumpled note with both hands. The other hugged a torn teddy bear as if it were all he had in the world. They both took a deep breath at the same time, a small gesture but full of courage. "Sir," said the one in front with a choked voice, "we don't have anywhere to sleep tonight." "Can we stay here?" the other added almost in a whisper. Henry opened his mouth, but no words came out. There was something in that note and the way the two looked at him that didn't match simple lost children. They weren't there by chance. And Henry realized this even before opening the paper. "Before continuing, please comment with the name of your city. I always like to see how far these stories reach, and if you want to follow the next ones, give it a like and subscribe. Now, let's move on." The cold wind blew in through the ajar door, bringing with it the smell of distant rain, that smell that always seemed to announce change. The sidewalk shone under the streetlights, and the puddles reflected light like small, trembling mirrors. Inside the mansion, however, everything remained too organized, too quiet, until 2 pairs of dirty little feet touched the light carpet at the entrance. Henry didn't know what bothered him more, the almost invisible stains on the expensive carpet or the fact that 2 such small children were there. Trembling at 9 p.m., he held the crumpled note carefully, as if it were too fragile for his businessman hands. It was just a piece of cheap paper, written with a fading pen, but it felt as heavy as a brick. Before opening it, he looked again at the twins. Both had dark hair, cut haphazardly, and eyes too big for their age, eyes that asked questions even before any words were spoken. The boy with the torn teddy bear squeezed the toy against his chest, trying to keep it whole. "I'm Leo," he murmured shyly, "and this is Luke. This is—" Luke swallowed hard and pointed with his chin at the note. "Mom said to give it only to Mr. Henry." He took a deep breath. "She said you would understand." The word "Mom" hit Henry deeply, as if someone had blown dust over old memories. Henry was used to being called doctor, sir, boss, but it had been years since anyone had brought that word into that big, empty house. He opened the door wider, almost reflexively. "Come in. It's cold out there." The boys exchanged glances, a gesture of fear and relief, and entered slowly, dragging worn slippers. Their noise seemed wrong on that silent floor, as if the whole house wasn't prepared for such small guests. Leo looked up and saw the crystal chandelier. "Wow, that chandelier is bigger than our room." Luke nudged him, as if afraid that saying too much would ruin their chance. Henry, however, only felt a tightness in his chest. He himself had thought something similar many years before, when handing out flyers in a fancy building. "This hall is bigger than my whole house." He lowered his gaze. "Did you eat an empanada today?" Luke responded. "We shared one, but the guy made us leave the line." The phrase came simply, without drama, without tears, but the hidden humiliation hurt more than any tear. Henry took a deep breath. "Come with me to the kitchen." They walked through the wide hallway, passing by paintings they didn't recognize, and a mirror where they saw themselves in full. Leo quickly averted his gaze, like someone who learned not to look too much at themselves, to avoid noticing what was missing. In the kitchen, the light was warmer, more human. There was cheese bread in a covered basket, left there since the afternoon. Henry served. 3 on a plate. "You can eat." The twins hesitated. It was as if they were waiting for someone to say, "No, that's not for you." But when they realized it was real, they sat down carefully, like 2 little soldiers on a delicate mission. The first bite made both their eyes shine. Henry watched in silence, and the note, still crumpled between his fingers, seemed to warm up. "Your mom?" he began hesitantly. "Where is she?" Luke stopped chewing. Leo hugged the teddy bear tighter. "She stayed at the clinic this morning," Luke replied. "She said she needed to stay there, and that today was the day for us to be brave," Leo added in a small voice, "just like you were when you were little." The phrase hit Henry like a silent slap. When he was little, how did those two know that? His heart raced. With trembling hands, he finally opened the note. The letters were simple, crooked, but familiar. "If you still remember the night of the rain, don't close the door on them." Henry's breath faltered. He widened his eyes. The night of the rain. He hadn't thought of it in decades. That night when a skinny boy, soaked from head to toe, knocked on a door asking for shelter, a door that opened for him and changed his entire life. He raised his gaze to the twins. They both watched him in silence, not with fear, but with the confidence of those who deeply believe in something that has yet to be said. The realization hit him. They weren't there by chance. They weren't lost. They weren't begging. They were there because of an old promise, a promise he had made himself without knowing it would one day be called upon. The twins, eating cheese bread with their legs swinging on the bench, were like two messengers from the past, bringing back something he thought was forgotten. And in that instant, in that exact second when he reread the phrase from the note, he felt a shift within himself. A note in hand, Henry understood that life had taken a full turn just to place them before him, and that now not opening the door would be the same as closing it on himself. Henry stood still in the center of the kitchen, as if the floor had become heavier. The open note rested between his fingers, but it was as if he were still reading it, even though he already knew the words by heart, the shaky handwriting, the cheap paper, and the phrase that spanned decades like a silent lightning bolt. "If you still remember the night of the rain, do not close the door on them." That memory came back in full, the roof leaking, the wet clothes clinging to his thin skin, cold hands holding a torn bag, and a humble door that opened for him without questions, without fear, without calculation. How to explain that to the boys? He tried to compose himself and cleared his throat. "You know who wrote this note, right?" Luke nodded, as if confirming something obvious. "It was Mom. She always tells that story about the night of the rain. She says that the gentleman was a skinny boy, just wearing flip-flops, whom her grandmother found trembling at the door." Leo, more talkative, added with a sparkle in his eyes, "And she says that the grandmother let the gentleman in, even without an extra bed. She gave him covered food, and the gentleman said something very important." Henry's heart tightened as if the phrase were returning to him for the first time. "What did I say?" he asked in a near whisper. Leo closed his eyes for a moment, recalling from memory that if one day he had a big house, he wouldn't let any child sleep on the street, not even for a night. The kitchen seemed to shrink. That childhood promise he repeated while laughing, with his belly full for the first time in days, had returned, not as a beautiful memory, but as a living doubt. Henry slowly sat down, not in his usual chair at the end, but in the one next to them. It felt like the right place that night. He smoothed the paper with the tips of his fingers. "Your mom is the daughter of whom again?" "Of Mrs. Marlene," Luke replied respectfully, "from the Blue and White Bar." Henry closed his eyes, letting the memory come like the smell of warm bread, the chicken croquettes on the counter, the tabs written down in a little notebook, the easy laughter, the advice that came without moralizing, the woman who had given him the first chance when no one saw a future in any street boy. "Mrs. Marlene," he repeated almost in prayer. "She changed my life." Leo leaned over the table, curious. Mum said that too, that Grandma said, "This boy will go far, but I hope he comes back at least once for coffee." Henry smiled, but it was a sad smile. Time had passed too quickly, and he had never returned. Luke carefully fiddled with the note, as if handling a relic. Mom wrote this yesterday morning, he explained before going to the clinic. She said she didn't know how long she would be there, and that Uncle Roger had no way to take care of us. Henry didn't need an explanation. He recognized the tired look of overcrowded homes, mattresses folded in the corner, relatives trying to help with the little they had. "And why didn't you stay at home?" he asked more gently. This time, Leo took a few seconds to respond, because two men knocked there early today, one with a clipboard, the other with a big key, saying that those who were behind had to leave. Henry felt his chest tighten. It wasn't drama, it wasn't exaggeration. It was the harsh and silent reality of thousands of families. A clean cut, and that was it. The roof was lost, Luke added. Mum packed our things in a backpack, gave the teddy bear to Leo and said, "You will look for a friend of mine. He promised something when he was a child. Let's see if he remembers." He took a deep breath, avoiding letting guilt become a weight. "And you came here alone?" "We took 2 buses, Luke replied. Mom drew a map. It was just to get off at the pink church square. Leo smiled proudly. I was the one who saw the church first. I pulled Luke and said, "It's here." Henry imagined the two walking through the night, holding the crumpled map, the teddy bear, the courage. The feeling hit hard. They were children, but they had been forced to act like adults. Suddenly, something inside them clicked. A clear, simple, inevitable decision. "Today," he said, standing up, "you will not sleep on the street. Not tonight, not tomorrow." The twins' eyes sparkled, but there was still caution in them. "Can we sleep on the couch?" Leo ventured. "It looks soft." Henry chuckled lightly. "You will sleep in a real room, but before that, I need to see your mom." Luke's eyes widened. "The gentleman at the clinic?" "Yes, tomorrow morning, and I want to bring something she likes. What does she usually complain about?" Luke smiled for the first time with lightness. "She hates coffee without sugar." Henry nodded, almost moved. "Then I will bring the sweetest one I can find." The boys settled into their chairs, relaxing for the first time since they entered that house. "And where are we sleeping tonight?" Luke asked with the frankness that only a child has. Henry gestured with his head. "I will show you." The three walked down the illuminated hallway between expensive paintings and impeccable furniture. And as Henry guided them, he realized that the question echoing inside him was as deep as it was old. Why had such a big house remained empty for so long until 2 children brought light to it? He knew the answer would begin to be built that night. The guest room was at the end of the hallway, with a large window facing the inner garden. Henry turned on the soft light of the lamp instead of the central ceiling light, so as not to scare them with that clinical white. The room smelled of stored sheets, new soap, and a hint of mothballs. The bed was too big for 2 boys used to sharing a mattress. "Wow," Leo murmured, his eyes scanning everything. "It looks like a movie set." Luke chuckled innocently. "I've never seen a movie that lets kids into this room," he commented, with a sincerity that made Henry smile. He opened the wardrobe, took out 2 soft blankets, and placed them at the foot of the bed. "If you get cold, just pull them up," he explained. "And this bathroom is just for you today. You can take a nice warm shower, no rush." Leo's eyes widened. "Warm shower," he repeated, as if it were an unimaginable luxury. "Warm. And with a shower head that doesn't need adjusting," he replied without thinking. He then remembered how many times he had showered with exposed copper wires, praying the water wouldn't shock him. The past seemed to be tapping on his shoulder with every sentence. Luke, more practical, asked, "But we won't be a burden?" Henry looked at the two, serious yet gentle. "A burden is letting a kid sleep on the sidewalk," he said. "You here are not a burden. You are guests." He was surprised by his own choice of words. Guests sounded much more affectionate than responsibility or social case, and that was what he truly wanted them to be that night. Guests breaking the silence of the mansion. As the twins took turns in the shower, Henry returned to the kitchen, put water on to boil on the stove, opened a packet of cocoa powder, and began to prepare hot chocolate without much practice. He was more used to ordering than making, but that night there was something sacred about stirring the spoon in the pot, watching the milk change color, remembering the smell of Grandma Marlene's kitchen. When the boys returned in borrowed pajamas from some past visitor who never came, they had a new glow on their faces. Their still damp hair stuck to their foreheads, and their skin, once dull from street dust, now looked more alive. "The shower didn't stop giving hot water once," Leo said, as if it were very important news. "And the bathroom even has towels like in a hotel," Luke added, proud to notice the details. Henry placed 2 steaming mugs on the table. "Be careful, it's hot," he warned. "If you want, there are cookies too." Leo picked up the mug with both hands, as if holding a treasure. He brought it close to his face, feeling the sweet steam rise, and took a careful first sip. The smile appeared before he even swallowed. "Just like what Mom makes when we catch a cold," Luke commented. He took a sip and suddenly became thoughtful. "You became friends with Grandma Marlene because of the rain, right?" he asked curiously. Henry leaned back in his chair, knowing that moment had arrived. "The moment to tell," he replied. "I was about your age, maybe a little older. I sold candy on the bus, and that day the rain poured down. I hid under the awning of your grandma's cafe. She saw me all soaked and asked if I had eaten dinner. I lied and said yes, but my stomach betrayed me, growling loudly." Leo let out a small laugh. "Mom loves that part of the story," he said. "She says your stomach was more honest than your mouth." Henry nodded, smiling. "It really was. Then she invited me in. She gave me dry clothes, a plate of food, coffee with milk, and said that if I wanted, I could help her there. I started washing dishes, sweeping the floor, then learned to take orders, to do the math. I always said that if one day I had a big house, no one would go through what I went through." He looked around at the sophisticated kitchen, the spacious living room next door, the empty hallway. "And I had the big house," he finished in a lower tone, "but I forgot to leave the door open." Luke stirred his mug, making small chocolate whirlpools. "Mom never forgot," he said. "She always said, that. Some people grow up and forget who pulled the first chair for them to sit. I hope Henry isn't like that." That sentence felt like both a hug and a reprimand at the same time. Henry felt the urge to ask everything about that woman, how she spoke, what she liked to hear, what music she played while cleaning the house, but he knew the night was advancing, and the boys, no matter how excited they were, needed to rest. He collected the empty mugs, stored the remaining cookies, and turned off some lights, leaving only the dim ones on. He took the twins back to the room, helped tuck in the sheet, and placed the teddy bear between them like a loving boundary. "If you feel scared, just press this button," he explained, turning on a lamp. "It's dim, but it won't leave the room dark." Leo touched the lamp with his finger, enchanted. "It looks like a fancy hotel room," he said before yawning. "But with really clean sheets," Luke added. Henry turned off the main light, leaving the moonlight on. He stepped back from the door, but the boys were still awake. "Mr. Henry," Leo suddenly called. "Hey, tomorrow when you see Mom." He hesitated. "Can you tell her we were brave?" Henry felt his eyes sting in a way that hadn't happened in a long time. "I will tell her," he assured. "And I will also say that she raised 2 very polite boys." Luke turned on his side, hugging the teddy bear, and murmured, "And what if Mom can't come home soon? Do you think we can stay here a little longer?" The question hung in the air, mixed with the sound of garden crickets and the distant rumble of a car on the street. Henry didn't answer right away. He didn't want to promise impulsively, but he also didn't want to run away. "We'll talk about it tomorrow after I speak with her," he replied, with sincerity. "But one thing I promise, you won't be alone." The boy's eyes slowly closed, cradled by a peace they hadn't felt in a long time. Henry stayed there for a few minutes, just listening to the synchronized breathing of the two, like gentle, calm waves. When he closed the door, the hallway of the mansion felt different. It was no longer an empty, echoing corridor. It was a hallway that led to a room where finally someone was breathing peacefully. And as he descended the stairs toward his own room, Henry had no idea that on that same night another door would be opened, not in the house, but in memory, bringing to light a secret that would change not only the twins' fate, but his as well. The alarm clock rang at 6 a.m., but Henry had already been awake for a few minutes. The house, which usually felt like a quiet hotel, now had a different sound, albeit discreet. A soft shuffle of slippers, a whisper in the hallway, the careful opening of a door. He got up, put on a simple shirt without the usual blazer, and went to the kitchen. He found Luke sitting at the table, swinging his legs in the air, and Leo standing, trying to reach the toaster. "Easy there, Chief. That could burn a distracted girl," joked Henry, taking the bread from the boy's hand before he touched the hot part. Leo chuckled awkwardly. "Back home, we only have a gas stove," he explained. "Toaster is something from the movies, because today is Brazilian movie day," replied Henry, placing the bread in the toaster carefully, along with coffee, bread, and plenty of butter. While they ate, he took the opportunity to ask more about their mum. "What's her full name again?" he asked, opening a notebook to jot it down. "Ana Paula dos Santos," Luke replied immediately, "but everyone calls her Ana. Which clinic is she in?" Henry continued. "At the municipal one, near the train station," Leo said. "The ambulance took her yesterday morning. She said it was just some test, but then she told us to go home and stay with Uncle." He paused, his gaze drifting for a moment. Henry mentally completed the sentence, "but then we got kicked out. There was no need to repeat it." After breakfast, Henry called the driver, but halfway through, he decided on something. "You don't need to come today," he said on the phone. "I'll drive myself." He hung up before the surprise question came from the other end. He found it strange himself. It had been a while since he had driven, but there was something symbolic about that gesture. He wanted to be the one to take that trip without intermediaries. Before leaving, he knelt down to the twins' level. "I'm going to see your mom now," he said. "You two will stay here with Mrs. Teresa, who cleans the house. She's on her way and will make lunch. I'll come back and tell you everything, okay?" Leo bit his lip. "Do you promise to tell her we behaved?" he asked. "I promise, and that we didn't touch anything," Luke added. Henry laughed. "I'll say right away that you two are gentlemen." And looking deeply into their eyes, he added, "I'm also going to say something important that I took a while, but I arrived." The journey to the clinic was a dive into the past. As the neighborhoods changed, the buildings became shorter, the shops simpler, and the colorful facades with peeling paint began to appear. He recognized pieces of the city he hadn't seen in years. Grandma Marlene's cafe was no longer there. In its place, a new pharmacy with a bright sign. He parked in front of the municipal clinic, that old building with pale walls, the movement of people coming and going, popcorn vendors at the door, ambulances arriving, tired relatives on the bench. Nothing there reminded him of the comfortable waiting rooms of his private clinics. It was another Brazil. At the reception, he spoke to the receptionist. "Good morning. I'd like to know about a patient, Ana Paula dos Santos." The attendant typed something into the computer, following along with her eyes. "Ward 3 clinic. Visiting hours are after 10, but if you speak with the nursing staff, maybe you can take a quick look earlier," she replied. Henry thanked her and went up. The corridor of the ward smelled of disinfectant and reheated coffee. People spoke softly, some whispered, others laughed nervously, trying to chase away the fear. With jokes, he walked slowly, feeling a bit like an intruder in that universe so different from his day-to-day life. He found the door to Ward 3 and entered. There were 4 beds, separated by curtains. In one of them, a woman with her hair tied back, pale face and sunken eyes, was looking out the window. He recognized the way she furrowed her brow. "Ana Paula," he called softly. She turned her face. For a second, her eyes looked confused, searching in her memory. Then they widened. "It can't be," Henry murmured. He smiled awkwardly in flesh, bone, and a little more belly than when his mom was alive. Anna adjusted the sheet awkwardly. "I'm so disheveled," she apologized. "You're alive," he replied. "That's what matters." She laughed and the cough came along, light but persistent. Henry approached, pulling a chair closer to the bed. The boys arrived safely. That was the first thing she asked, without beating around the bush. It touched him deeply before he knew it. She wanted to know about them. "They arrived with a map, a note and courage," he replied. "They slept in a better bed than mine, I think." Anna sighed with relief. "I spent the whole night wondering if they managed to find the house," she confessed. "This world is too big for 2 little boys." Henry nodded in silence. "Did you read the note?" she asked hesitantly. He carefully took the folded paper out of his shirt pocket. "I read it several times," he replied. "I almost smelled your mum's coffee when I read the first line." Anna smiled with her eyes. Tears welled up. "Mrs. Marlene would be happy to see the size of your house," she said. "But she would scold you, you know. So many empty rooms. Boy, and you living alone like an owl." He laughed in agreement. "She used to scold me when I shared a room with 3 others and still complained. Remember?" For a few minutes, they stayed there sharing memories of Mrs. Marlene, the stories she told, her advice about not losing humility, the times she went without dinner to ensure the boys on the street had something to eat. Then Henry grew serious. "Anna, why didn't you reach out to me earlier?" he asked carefully. "Why wait until everything got to this point?" She fiddled with the sheet, embarrassed. "Because I didn't want to be just another person knocking on your door out of self-interest," she confessed. "I saw you on television, in magazines, Businessman of the Year, Stock Market Millionaire. I thought, he doesn't need anyone from the past bothering him." And I was also angry, to be honest. He frowned but didn't take offense. "Angry at life, not at you." She took a deep breath. "Seeing so many people moving forward while we were stuck is hard, but every time I remembered the night of the rain, I thought, if I squeeze my heart too tight, I'll end up becoming everything my mom said not to become. So I kept your name in a beautiful corner of my memory. But when they said they were going to admit me and the eviction came along, I didn't have the courage to send the boys to a shelter." She looked directly into his eyes. "You were the only person I remembered who once slept in my living room without a place to go. So I wrote the note and bet on a boy's promise." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full of understanding. Henry took a deep breath. "I took a while to come," he admitted, "but I'm here now." Anna smiled again and arrived before the boys had to learn to sleep at the train station. He said that. That's already a lot. He held her hand gently. "I want to help," he stated, "not with charity, but like someone paying an old debt. And I'm not just talking about money. I'm talking about home, education, a chance to start over." Anna closed her eyes for a moment, as if trying to absorb it all. "I don't want them to grow up thinking they are a burden," she murmured. "We've heard that too many times." Henry squeezed her hand a little tighter. "They are not a burden. They are a reason." And after a pause, he added, "And you too?" At that moment, a nurse entered to check the vital signs, and the conversation had to quiet down. But before stepping away, Henry made a silent promise right there, amidst the smell of the clinic and the comings and goings of people. That story wouldn't end with just a few days. What he still didn't know was that upon returning home, he wouldn't be the only one to have made a decision. Leo and Luke, with the simple logic of children, would already be planning something that would put Henry in front of the mirror, as hadn't happened in a long time. When Henry walked back into the house, it was already past noon. The smell of sautéed garlic and onions wafted through the mansion, a rare occurrence. Mrs. Teresa, in her floral apron, was stirring a large pot, humming softly an old radio tune. "You're back, Doctor?" she asked, used to calling him that. "The boys are in the living room drawing. They're not causing any trouble. You know?" Henry smiled. "They do seem well behaved," he replied. "And ma'am, when you're done, have lunch with us, okay? No eating alone in the service area." She widened her eyes in surprise and then smiled, a bit embarrassed. In the living room, Leo and Luke were sitting on the carpet, surrounded by sheets of paper and colored pencils. Upon seeing Henry, they stood up at the same time. "And?" Luke asked eagerly. "How's Mom?" He sat on the couch, calling the two of them closer. "She's tired, but she's okay," he answered honestly. "She missed you both so much, and asked me to give each of you a kiss." He kissed Leo's forehead, then Luke's, feeling the weight of that gesture. The boys smiled in relief. "She said you both were very brave," he added, "and that I also need to learn to be brave again." Leo frowned. The boy asked, "Afraid of what?" Henry thought for a second. "Afraid of opening my heart's door again," he replied straightforwardly. "When we take too many hits from life, sometimes we think it's easier to stay locked up. But then life sends two 6-year-olds with a crumpled note to remind us of who we were." The boys exchanged glances, satisfied to have unknowingly fulfilled such a big mission. "Mom will be able to come home soon." Luke wanted to know. "She will need some more time," Henry explained. "She'll undergo some treatments. Follow the doctor's recommendations, but then there's something I want to talk to you about." He took a deep breath. He had thought about the words on the way back. "Do you remember what your mom wrote in the note?" he asked. "If you still remember the night of the rain, don't close the door on them." Leo nodded. "I remember, so I don't just want to open the door for one night." He looked at both of them. "I want you to know that starting today, you have a permanent place here. While your mom is getting treatment, this house is also yours. It's not a hotel. It's not a favor for a day. It's home." Luke's eyes filled with tears, but he tried to hold them back. "Like living here?" he asked in shock. "Like having a room that knows your names?" Henry replied. "Like having a school right around the corner with paid supplies, uniforms, and snacks? Like having people asking about homework and how the day went. It felt like having a key." He took out a simple keychain with 2 identical keys from his pocket. "This is the beginning," he said. "One for each of you, to remind you that you're not just knocking at the door anymore. You're in." Leo looked at the key as if it were a jewel. "But what about Mom?" he asked, afraid of sounding ungrateful. "Will she live here too later?" Henry smiled with a tenderness he himself found surprising. "If she wants to, yes." He paused. "By the way, I thought of something. Remember Mrs. Marlene's cafe?" Luke nodded excitedly. "The one that turned into a pharmacy." "Exactly. I can't bring the cafe back, but I can bring the idea," he explained, gesturing. "I have an empty property nearby. I was renting it out for an office, but it never worked out. I'm thinking of setting up a simple space there with coffee, affordable home-cooked food, and a little tutoring corner for kids from working families. And I wanted Anna, your mom, to be the owner of that place, with a salary, with help, but with her name on the door." The boys fell silent, trying to imagine that, like Grandma's cafe, but for Mom. Leo ventured with shining eyes. "Like that," Henry confirmed. "Anna's cafe, or whatever name she wants. The important thing is that just like her mother provided for so many people, she can do the same. And I'll be there, not as a bossy owner, but as a partner who owes a favor." Luke couldn't hold back. A tear slipped down, and he didn't try to hide it. He approached Henry and hugged his waist a bit awkwardly, as if unsure if he had permission. Henry returned the hug, resting his hand on the boy's head. "Thank you, mister," Luke murmured. "I've never had a key to anything." "Now you do," he replied, his voice choked. Leo, not wanting to be left out, hugged both of them, still holding the key in his hand. For a moment the image that formed there was simple but powerful. A man who grew up alone, two boys who almost slept on the street, and a hug that closed a circle that had been open for many years under the rain. Mrs. Teresa appeared at the living room, at the door, wiping her hands on her apron, and watched the scene in silence. A smile appeared on her face. "Lunch is ready," she announced gently, "but if you want a few more minutes, I can wait." Henry laughed, discreetly wiping the corners of his eyes. "No, Mrs. Teresa, now is the perfect time." He stood up, still with an arm around the boys. "Today is the day everyone eats together." At the table, the fluffy rice, thick bean stew, seasoned breadcrumbs, and stewed chicken took on a different flavor. Between bites, stories from Henry's childhood emerged, tales from Mrs. Marlene's time, memories from the boys' school, small and big dreams. There was laughter, funny faces, and even a competition to see who would scrape the pot of chocolate fudge that Teresa decided to make for dessert. It wasn't a magazine-worthy banquet. There were no silver utensils or napkins folded into flowers. It was just good food, real people, and a promise being fulfilled without any speeches. Later, when the boys went to play in the garden, running after a little paper airplane, Henry leaned against the doorframe, listening to their noise. He filled the spaces that had once been occupied only by the sound of the expensive clock in the living room. He thought of Mrs. Marlene. He imagined her from wherever she was, hands on her hips, saying, "Took you long enough to learn, huh, boy?" He smiled to himself. That night, before bed, he went to the twins' room. They were lying down, facing each other, a teddy bear in the middle like a friendly border guard. The new keys rested under their pillows. "Today was the best day of my life," Leo murmured, almost asleep. "And it started without a house," Luke replied, smiling with his eyes closed. "Just imagine when Mum comes to see this place." Henry turned off the light, leaving only the moon lamp on. He stayed there for a few seconds, listening. As he left the room, he walked to the porch and looked at the street. He remembered the first time, as a teenager, he slept under a roof that wasn't the station's. He recalled the promise made with a full belly and a grateful heart. He remembered how many years he had spent pretending that phrase was just a nice memory and not a commitment. Now finally the promise had taken shape. Two boys smelling of cheap shampoo running through the house, a woman with her name on the door of a future cafe, and a mansion that was starting to feel like home. He breathed in the fresh night air, and for the first time in a long time, felt he wasn't alone in that huge house. And there, beside each screen, the question lingered in the air, gentle, without accusation, but full of invitation. If two children knocked on your door today, with a crumpled note and courage in their eyes, would you open it?